today's episode, my goal is to give you some simple and easy steps on how to use body filler. By the end of this video, you'll be confident in using body filler and getting a straight repair. So let's get in the garage and make some noise. So on the last episode of Garage Noise, we started the repairs on this front fender. We removed the headlight, removed the bumper cover, and then we started pulling out the damaged area, tapping down the crowns or the high spots in order to get that metal level. We fit back up the headlight, and then we started the repairs on the metal to flatten those out as best as possible before we start with filler. I've got some upol filler ready. Let's mix it up and apply our first coat of body filler. Upol lightweight gold filler. It's not going to take too much. I cut down a bondo spreader here, and we're just going to fold this in till it's all one uniform color. So what I do is I fold it in, press it out on the board, press out any air. You don't want to introduce any extra air, so avoid just stirring it, because that's going to introduce air and cause pinholes, which creates a problem, and you're going to have to fill those, and it just takes more time to get it right. So mix it in, I'm pressing it out, pressing out the air. We're just going to get a little bit on our spreader, and then I'm just going to apply it to the area I want. I've sanded a little bit outside of the area. I'm still trying to keep this pretty small. After you've pulled and straightened the dent, the next step is to prepare the surface for body filler. Whether you're applying the filler over bare metal, epoxy primer, or paint, you need to sand that and prepare that with 80 grit sandpaper. If you have questions on what your body filler can be applied over, always check your technical data sheet put out by the manufacturer. You can find those online. In a production repair situation, I prefer to apply my body filler over bare metal. Now, not everyone's going to agree with this, and that's okay. There's many ways to do a repair. As long as you do it properly, this repair will last the life of this vehicle. You may also notice that I apply my body filler over the sanded edge of paint, and the reason I do that is because it cuts down on the chance of mapping. Mapping is when the primer shrinks in the edge of the paint or body filler, and that creates a line or a halo that's going to show up underneath your paint and clear coat. By applying our body filler over that properly sanded edge of paint, we eliminate the chance of that primer shrinking into that edge of paint. So we've mixed and we're applying our first coat of body filler here. The one thing I want to note is when you apply your first coat, you do want to press it into the panel, just a little bit of pressure on it to promote adhesion. The other thing, and I can't stress this enough, don't try and put all the body filler on at once. Get a manageable amount on your spreader when you apply your first coat. Put it on the panel and then spread it out. In my experience, multiple layers of body filler rather than one thick coat is going to be a much better repair, and it's going to save you a lot of frustration. The next step is to let this dry. It usually takes about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll block sand this out with 80 grit sandpaper. Now, you're going to use a block that's about the size of the repair or a little bit larger. You're going to hold your block flat and block it in an X pattern. Off camera, we went ahead and blocked this body filler out with some 80 grit sandpaper on a medium-sized block. Now, you want to hold your block flat when you're blocking your panel. You want to move with the contours of this fender. So if you have a roll or a contour in your fender, block within that, okay? Holding your block flat at all times. You want to block it in a crosshatch or X pattern in all different directions. Now, if you start to break through into bare metal, you want to stop what you're doing because you either have a high spot or you need to add some more filler. A good way to determine whether you have a high area or a low area or a combination of both is to hold your hand flat against the panel and move quickly across the repair area. And you should be able to feel where there's a high or a low area. Now, this takes a little bit of practice, but if you can develop a feel for it, it's really going to help you out in the long run. Another common mistake when you're block sanding your body filler is removing too much filler. So you're using your filler to fill those low areas and create a level transition into the rest of the panel. By blocking out too much filler, you can expose those high areas, and that's going to just be a vicious cycle where you're blocking out too much filler, you're applying more filler, and then blocking out too much again. So just be aware of that when you're repairing your vehicle. So in this sanding process, the sandpaper is important. So we started by initially blocking this with 80 grit. That's a coarse sandpaper. Now we're moving to 180, blocking the same area with 180 grit sandpaper, and that's going to refine those 80 grit scratches to a finer scratch. Then we'll move on to blocking it with 320 to refine those scratches even more before we primer. If deep scratches remain and you leave those scratches in your work, then when you go ahead and prime it, that primer is going to shrink into those scratches over time, and it could expose deep scratches in the repair area. So you want to avoid that by refining those scratches. We now have this all blocked out with 180 grit sandpaper, so we're going to blow it off, wipe it down, and now we're going to apply what's called a polyester glazing putty, and it's basically a body filler that's very smooth. It's lightweight, meaning it's easy to sand. It's made to fill any imperfections, any deep scratches or waves in your panel. So I like to use this as an insurance policy. I'll coat the entire repair area, and then we'll go ahead and block it with 180 grit sandpaper. The specific product I use is USC Icing, and if you guys are interested in any of the tools or products I use, I always leave the links down in the description of the video. I'll apply this over the entire repair area, and this product is made to go over a 180 grit scratch. So we finished our sanding with 180, and now we can apply this icing over it. Now that we have our icing applied, we're going to go ahead and let this cure. It'll take about 10 minutes. And then what I'll do is I'll use a little guide coat. This is a charcoal-based powder that shows you any high or low areas when you're blocking out your repair area. There's also an aerosol version of this available, and also in a pinch you could also use a flat black aerosol paint. I would stay away from the gloss, and that's not quite as good. It will gum up your paper a little bit, but you could get by using a flat black paint. I'll continue to block this out with 180 grit sandpaper until it's nice and level. So the guide coat's going to show us any low areas, so as we block this out, those low areas, we're going to be able to see those. And then as we block it flat, they're going to go away.
All right, let's switch it over to 320 grit sandpaper.
Sanding it with 320 is all about refining those 180 grit scratches before we apply our primer. And from my experience, you never want a primer over a 180 grit scratch. There will be some people that disagree with me on this point, but I've seen too many times where primer shrinks into that 180 grit scratch, and then you can see it through your repair underneath your clear coat and just looks horrible. Now, some of that will depend on the quality primer you use. Some primers shrink less than others, but just know that 320 is a coarse enough scratch that you're still going to have good adhesion between your primer and your body filler. We are now ready to primer this, so I'm going to prep out the surrounding area of this repair with 600 grit sandpaper. That's just in case we get some overspray on those areas. I'll go ahead and mask this off for primer, and the primer I'm using today is the upol 2K primer with this R500 low volume, low pressure paint gun. We will apply 2 coats of this primer, 10 minutes in between coats to let it flash off. I've got my air pressure set pretty low at around 15 psi to apply this primer. Now, this particular gun is fitted with a 1.5 tip. You can sometimes spray primer out of a 1.3 tip and needle set. Just depends on the primer, how thick it is and how thick you mix it. And this particular primer, you can spray it as a high build primer and it mixes 4:1, or you can spray it as a primer surfacer that mixes 4:1:1. And you can also use this primer as a sealer before you paint, and that mixture is 4:1:2. So after we've let this flash off, we're going to apply our second coat here, and then this primer will be ready to be block sanded and painted. So the next step in this is we're going to block this with 320 grit sandpaper and then prep out this paint with 600. Then we'll apply our base, and then I'll share with you how to lay down a beautiful looking clear coat finish. So if you want to learn how to paint your vehicle, check out the next episode. Listen, I appreciate each and every one of you watching. If you found this video helpful, Please consider subscribing and liking this video, and we'll see you next time on Garage Noise.